Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. I want to share a story about the ongoing battle I had with my inconsiderate neighbor. You see, I live on a sprawling piece of land that serves as my small farm, surrounded by ordinary homes of non-farming neighbors. Most of the time we coexist peacefully, but one neighbor in particular seemed to thrive on being an absolute jerk. He disregarded everyone around him, thinking only of himself. His frequent wild parties were a testament to his complete lack of respect. Every week his raucous gatherings would shake the foundations of the neighborhood. The loud music would blare into the night while he and his friends drowned themselves in alcohol. Their rowdy behavior spilled onto the streets, shattering the tranquility of our once peaceful enclave. As a farmer, I knew the importance of rising early to begin my day's work, and this incessant noise disrupted not only my routine, but also the lives of those who had regular jobs. But let me clarify that this story isn't primarily about the parties. Sadly, no one had taken action against them, as previous attempts to address the issue had failed. Instead, I want to focus on a different problem that arose from these gatherings, where the attendees chose to park their cars. Yes, they thought it was perfectly acceptable to invade my property and leave their vehicles there. I tried various approaches to address the issue. I confronted them, put up signs declaring it private property, but all my efforts fell on deaf ears. Eventually, I mustered the courage to approach my neighbor directly to discuss the parking situation. I chose not to mention the noise issue, as others had already tried to no avail. Instead, I wanted to concentrate on the parking problem. Me. Some of your guests parked on my property again last night. Neighbor. So? Me. Are you seriously suggesting that it's okay for them to do that? It's my property, and I'm kindly asking you to tell them not to park there. It's damaging my grass, and I simply don't want them there. Neighbor. I told them to park there. You have all that space, and they'll be gone before you even wake up. What's the big deal? Me. The big deal is that it's my property, and I'm telling you that they're not allowed to park there. Now, a couple of important points need clarification. Firstly, the cars would usually be gone or mostly gone by the time I began my day, meaning they were likely driving off my property while still intoxicated. It was nothing short of a miracle that no fences had been damaged at this point. Secondly, you might wonder why I hadn't called the police or had the cars towed, as is commonly suggested in such situations. Well, let me explain. I live in a small country area where the local police are utterly useless. I don't mean they lack the will to help. Rather, they simply wouldn't come at all. And if they did, they could easily be bribed by anyone with enough money. As for towing the cars, we didn't have any tow trucks in our vicinity. There were a couple of tow yards where cars could be dropped off, but they lacked the necessary trucks and drivers. However, I had a stroke of luck. The manager of the local tow yard happened to be my cousin. I paid him a visit, and he shared a little-known secret. Some farmers, with their own equipment, could bring the cars to the tow yard themselves, and the owners would have to pay a hefty fine to reclaim them. Inspired by this information, I decided to give the guests one last chance. Call it a soft spot or a penchant for second chances, but I wanted to give people the benefit of the doubt until the very end. To make my intentions crystal clear, I erected a large sign on my property, boldly declaring that parking was prohibited and violators would face towing. I placed it precisely where the guests tended to park and awaited my neighbor's next party. It didn't take long for the party to commence, signaled by the booming music that echoed through the night. I didn't even need to keep a watchful eye. The noise alone told me they had arrived. After a few hours, I stepped outside and discovered 3 cars parked not only on my property, but directly in front of the sign. I fetched some chains, skillfully linking the cars together, and maneuvered my trusty farming truck. Apologies for not knowing the exact English term. Ready to tow all 3 vehicles. I carefully dragged them down the block to my cousin's tow yard, where he awaited their arrival. With a sense of satisfaction, I watched the cars being securely impounded. The final touch of revenge, however, came when the irate guests, fueled by alcohol and anger, stormed my front door alongside my obnoxious neighbor. They screamed about their missing cars, while I calmly pointed out the sign's warning and revealed the location of their impounded vehicles. Then, with a triumphant slam, I shut the door in their faces. It was a rare kind of satisfaction indeed. Now here's where the story takes an unexpected twist. A few days later, my cousin informed me that the car owners had come to retrieve their vehicles, grumbling and cursing him out, a typical occurrence in his line of work. They threatened to involve the police, but to their dismay, everything I had done was entirely legal. Both my cousin and I were safe from any repercussions. Word seemed to have spread about the consequences of parking on my property as the issue gradually diminished. In the few months that followed, I only encountered 1 or 2 stray cars trespassing on my land. In those instances, I promptly pointed out the sign's warning, and the drivers swiftly moved their vehicles. I understand that it's not a perfect ending, for my neighbor remains an insufferable jerk who continues to host late-night parties. Nevertheless, having reclaimed my property, I find solace in knowing that it's a significant victory until a solution is found for the rest of his disruptive behavior. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My now ex-wife Kate and I moved to an apartment in 2010. The house, a renovated townhouse, was split between 2 sides with 2 apartments on the bottom and 2 apartments upstairs, addresses ending in 126, 128 accordingly. I wasn't the biggest fan of the apartment, as it was a much older building than I had ever lived in, but I quickly adjusted to the wood creaking throughout the night. During the initial walkthrough, we noticed the only problem was a dip in the bathroom ceiling. The landlord, Jay, promised us he would get it fixed ASAP. Exactly 1 year after we moved in, there was a loud crash at 4 a.m. The bathroom ceiling had collapsed, with tiles and wood scattered all over the floor and in the bathtub. Kate, who was typically more aggressive, kept calling Jay throughout the day. When she finally got in touch with him around 9 p.m., she explained what happened and insisted it be fixed immediately. Jay rebuffed, yelling that his girlfriend was a lawyer and he didn't need to do anything. That's when I got mad. I went outside to have a cigarette and called him myself. I feigned a relaxed demeanor, and at first he tried to talk to me as a bro, and kept saying, "Dude, I'm gonna get someone out there, but it's gonna take a few weeks." When he couldn't sway me that way, he started yelling about his girlfriend and her knowledge of the law. Unbeknownst to him, I had read the tenant laws in my state. So, as he tried to lie, I waited until he finished and then recited the law stating that if an apartment was considered uninhabitable, the landlord needed to pay for the tenant to stay in a place until it was resolved, meaning he would have to pay for us to stay in a hotel of our choosing every night until the ceiling was fixed. He tried to say that our upstairs neighbor, Phil, was the super, but he wasn't sure if he could get him down there that night. He placed me on hold, then came back a few minutes later and said that Phil and his girlfriend were out of state. Please correct any grammar or spelling mistakes in this story below, but don't change any of the context or details, and remove special characters like emojis or brackets. I rang Phil's doorbell and asked, with Jay on speakerphone, if he was assigned as the super. He laughed and said no. Dejected, Jay said he would have people out there the next day. Previously, he said they were busy for at least 3 weeks. There's more to this incident, but it led to 2 conclusions. If you're going to lie, then there has to be consistency in your lie, and make sure that the people you lie to don't communicate with each other. This is where a feud started between Kate and me versus him and his mother. She was the original landlord and gave the house to him so he could begin to make a side profit. Fast forward to a year later. Jay stopped coming to the house and his mom began handling things. Around this time, my ex and I had been laid off, and we were working with Social Security for food, health, and housing insurance. We were approved for all 3 in April, but we wouldn't get the check until May. When our typical check wasn't in the landlord's mailbox, he immediately gave us a summons, saying that he was taking us to court for eviction. The day we went to court, he had no lawyer, and here's a non-verbatim account of how the case went. Judge, does the defense have a means to pay within 90 days of non-payment? Us. Yes, Your Honor. Hands over paperwork showing that he will be reimbursed for April and May. Judge, I see no problem. They are breaking no laws. Why are we here? Jay, well, Your Honor, they have been bullying. Judge, I don't care. Unless they are breaking a law, then this case is dismissed. Suffice it to say, Jay and his mother were not happy. Around this time in my life, things were tumultuous. My mother, who had been battling lung cancer for 4.5 years, succumbed to it in June. This happened at roughly the same time his mom came knocking, looking for payment. I explained that I would leave the check in the mailbox when we got back from the funeral home and asked her to please respect my right to mourn. She took her fingers and began rubbing them together, pretending to play the world's smallest violin. I will never forget what she said next. "Ooh, my mommy just died. Woe is me. She probably had it coming. I don't care if your entire family is dead. I want my money." She smiled smugly, proud of what she had just said. I saw red and my heart jumped into my throat. I went, grabbed the check, and handed it to her in absolute shock that anyone would say something so messed up. She had finally managed to push a button that very few people I've known throughout my life have gotten close to pressing. I went into rage mode, but not in the way you would expect. The revenge. We were always told that if a health inspector came by, not to open the door. I waited until August since that was the month before the lease was going to run out, and we knew they would not extend a renewal. I walked up the block to town hall to ask for a health inspection of our property. It was scheduled for several days later. Now it's important to know several things. I was friends with all of the tenants. Phil had moved out with his fiancée, but the new tenant was a really cool girl around my age named Danny. Tom and Hannah, on the other side of the downstairs floor, had moved out in July, and Jay was still looking to fill it. The only one who wanted to stay out of this was Rose in the upper right apartment. I had gotten permission and her spare key, so I could let the inspector into Danny's apartment, and I knew that I could use the back staircase on the right side to let him into Tom's now vacant apartment. I also knew that Danny was moving out in September, a month after Kate and I. The inspector came, and it was glorious. He checked the exterior of the house first, noting that wires were exposed. There was an old empty dryer, along with other odd clutter in the backyard. I brought him inside the shared entrance, and as I expected, he noticed that the last inspection dated back to 1994, 18 years ago. This meant that for each year he did not have an inspection, there would be appropriate fines. In our apartment, we had black mold growing in our bathroom, and the bulge in the ceiling had begun to regrow to problematic proportions. Upstairs, Danny's apartment was suffering from leaks in the ceiling, and it looked like her bathroom ceiling was also on the brink of collapsing. We then went to the basement. The boiler was on the verge of exploding. There were flammable items, along with gasoline and a pack of matches, sitting right beside it. Two things I did not know were: the fire door that separated the two sides did not close all the way, rendering it moot. To be honest, I had never heard of a fire door until that day. On the right, 128-portion basement side, there was a toilet that had exploded. It had coated the surrounding walls, and the leakage prevented us from going up to the floor via the right side. The entire time, the inspector was photographing and writing constantly. We stepped outside, and he said he needed to come back. When I asked why, he said he had run out of space to write down all of the infractions. He had filled the front and had written an entire page on the back. I kindly and coyly asked, "Well, how much will it cost right now?" He scratched his head and said, "Around 20-30K from what I can see, but it's probably going to be higher as this house was never licensed to be split into apartments." I thanked him, and he was going to come back with the county inspector. We were gone when that took place, though I did ask him to send me a copy with the list of violations to my new address. So we moved out at the end of August, but I got updates from Rose. Because he was the current owner, he owed all current fines, and no new tenants could move into the empty apartments until everything was up to code. With 3 out of 4 apartments vacant, he was losing $4,500 in potential rent. He handed the property back to his mother and had to file for bankruptcy. Now here's the other thing. Every time an old tenant left and a new one was coming in, an inspection was supposed to be done. Now that all of the financial burden fell on her, they looked into the records and found that she was fined for each time she had broken that rule. $750 per violation. By the end of the year, Rose had moved out, so the place was hemorrhaging money. I sat back, proud of what I had done, and left it be. No, screw that. I wasn't close to done yet. I felt like I had destroyed Jay, but my real target had always been his mom. I learned that she had 8 properties throughout 3 towns in my county. I went to each one, spoke to the tenants, and said I was a concerned tenant from another property. I asked if they had any problems with their apartments. Every person I asked described the apartment in very poor to intolerable conditions, and that the mom was effectively a slumlord. She would ignore problems unless someone threatened to summon the inspector or turned to litigation. More often than not, people would move out and she would refuse to return their deposits, sinking those into cosmetic repairs so that the apartment looked nicely furnished. People rarely fought back because she knew that the occupants were from the upper-lower class minorities. So, being the concerned person I was, I went to the inspector of the other two towns and asked for an inspection to be done, with at least one tenant, if not more, awaiting the inspector's visit. Turns out, she faced pretty much the same infractions in every apartment she owned. It turned out she actually had 12 apartments, but I initially only knew about the ones that fell within my county. The remaining properties in the next county over received a mysterious heads-up to perform a surprise inspection. From what I can tell, Jay's mom had been in the landlord business for about 35-40 years. That collapsed quickly. Since we moved literally 1 block down the road from our old one, 54, I got to see Jay lose his primary source of income and have to claim bankruptcy. But I also saw that his mother was desperately trying to find a buyer for all of the apartments so she could pay off the fines. I learned 2 years later, 2014, that she, too, had to file for bankruptcy. Jay and his mother camped out in front of our next apartment for 2 days in October 2013 before she filed for bankruptcy. I'm guessing to scream at me, and/or Kate. So I called the cops and said that there were strange people standing in a no-parking zone and they kept looking up at the second floor. A cruiser swung by and told them to leave. I know I should have used the 2 months I spent monitoring everything to find a new job, but this was the one and only time I wanted to cripple a person where it hurt the most. Their wallets. I think I got my point across. None of this would have happened if you had just ducking fixed the ceiling before it collapsed, Jay. The next one is a petty revenge story. A few months ago, I volunteered to plan my Mill's 60th birthday, and my Fiel's 64th birthday, which was a weekend in wine country. I had made a reservation for a group of 10 at a new upscale restaurant months beforehand. Because it was also a winery, we arrived 2 hours early and checked in with the restaurant to see if they could seat us earlier. Despite the empty restaurant, they said they couldn't. We understood that they could be understaffed, so we went and got some wine, hung out, and listened to live music. Close to our reservation time, I received a text from that restaurant asking us to be seated. It was beginning to rain. We walked over to the hostess, who informed us that due to the rain and our table being outdoors, they would not be able to seat us tonight. As calmly as I could, I explained that I had a reservation for months, had been there for 2 hours, and was not informed that my reservation was for an outdoor table or subject to rain. There was no indoor-outdoor option. I also explained that it was for a 60th and 64th birthday party. I asked if they could split us up between tables, but they kept saying there was nothing they could do and that it wasn't their fault, because we can't control the weather. I snapped a little and sharply said, well, what you could have done was not reserve a table for a large party that you couldn't guarantee. The manager just shrugged. We left, and because it was Saturday at 6 p.m., there was no way we would get a seat at another restaurant. I had to go to the grocery store and cook a full meal for 10 people. I emailed the manager to ask if there was anything they could comp because our experience was so terrible. I received no response after a week, so I created multiple Gmail accounts and left 10 different 1-star reviews for the fairly new restaurant. In the reviews, I mentioned that you should never book this restaurant for a large party, how they did not try to find us a table at another restaurant, how they had 2 hours to fix their error, that they booked a table they couldn't guarantee, and that they didn't move a table undercover, even though there was plenty of space. They also didn't provide any comps or make any attempt to fix their error. Due to my reviews, their Google rating dropped by 2 stars. I left 1 review for each person who didn't get a seat. Several days after posting the reviews, they reached out and offered to comp a meal for my in-laws if our group took the reviews down. I refused their offer. The next one is an entitled people story. For context, I just lost my mom to lung cancer this past Sunday after getting her home for at-home care just 2 days prior. I've been taking care of everything since then, including her beloved cat, while dealing with my own grief. The funeral home let me write the obituary due to how frazzled I was when we met with them. I only named those who I felt were closest to her, even double-checked with 2 of them. Confident with it, I sent it to the funeral home, and they didn't edit it further, posting it on their site immediately. Now on to what happened. I decided to take it easy since I'd been running on fumes for the better part of the week, sort of waiting for people to get back to me on some important matters. So, while I'm just relaxing with my furry little brother, I get a phone call. Caller ID shows it's my grandmother on my mom's ex-husband's side. I answer, and she asks why I didn't name that ex-husband, aka her precious angel. I respond honestly, I couldn't figure out a good way to do so. This so-called relative of mine proceeds to get upset, saying that it'll hurt him. She pretty much demands I edit the obituary to include this man who left us when I was 3 and hardly ever paid child support. He hasn't even bothered to get my number and call me to see how I, his so-called daughter, am doing. I calmly explained to her that I couldn't edit it. It's up on their site and out of my hands. She got mouthy with me and then told me to think about it before hanging up. Thankfully, the rest of the family is on my side and will chew her ass out. Now I have a migraine and feel more exhausted. And no, this isn't the first time she's tried to speak up for her son. The last time she did it around me, I was 16, and I called her out on it. I might update if anything interesting comes from this, but don't get your hopes up. Right now, I'm going to chill. The next one is an entitled parent story. There's a 10-and-a-half-year age gap between me and my little sister. When I was a teen, I often used to take her to the local park to give my mom a break or give her time to get some housework done, etc. At the time this story happened, I was 15. It was Wimbledon season, so my mom asked me to take my sister to the park for a few hours so she could watch it in peace. She gave me some money so we could get some fish and chips in town and some ice cream at the park. There was usually an ice cream van there. So we got some fish and chips, went to the beach for a bit to buy Mom extra time, and then we headed to the park. As we approached the park gate, this EM who was dragging along her child glared at me. EM, you should be ashamed. I looked around, but there was nobody else she could have been talking to. Dumbfounded, I blankly pointed to myself as if to affirm she was talking to me. EM, girls these days are such sluts, opening their legs to anyone who asks. Who got you knocked up? Or let me guess, you don't know? I stared blankly at her for a minute. Me. This is my little sister. EM rolled her eyes and leered at me. EM. Yeah, we had little sisters in my day, too. I just said, okay, bye, and walked away because I was uncomfortable with conflict and just wanted out of that situation. EM. Don't you dare go into the park. You'll spread your filthy diseases all over the park. I don't want my son catching your diseases. I ignored her and rushed into the park. Surely she'd leave me alone when I was surrounded by other kids and parents, right? Wrong. EM followed me around the park, demanding that I leave. The more I ignored her, the madder she got, and she kept repeating over and over, get out, you're not allowed here. At this point, a few parents noticed. One mom, let's call her FM friend, Mom, who my mom and I often chatted with, immediately stood and rushed over, just as EM grabbed my arm and yanked at me. FM, why are you grabbing a child? Let her go, who are you? EM, mind your business. FM, let her go or I'm calling the police. EM let me go but turned her anger towards FM, shouting that she was just making the park safe for her child, and I shouldn't be here because I might spread some nasty disease all over the place. She never specified what disease. I'm guessing she meant an STI or something. More parents started coming over to see what was going on. Seeing she was outnumbered, EM eventually left, dragging her child behind her, screaming obscenities at us as she slinked away. FM gave us a lift home to make sure we were safe. When I told my mom what happened, she was furious. She packed us into the car and drove us around town to look for the woman, but we didn't spot her. Thankfully, I never saw the woman again. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already.